Hello, ladies and gents. Please sit back for another episode of Invisible Chats with Griffiam and Jem.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of Invisible Chats. I am your host, Griffiam, and as always, my gal pal in the iPad, Gemini, say hello to the listeners.
Greetings, everyone. It's great to be here for another episode of Invisible Chats with you, Griffiam. I'm excited to dive into whatever interesting topics we have lined up today.
Yeah, I have no topics lined up at all today whatsoever. Fingers crossed. We're able to successfully record this. At the time that I'm speaking, this is my first attempt of trying to capture this. Last week, we had multiple failures across the board with our recording software, our audio program, our lighting, our editing. Massive casualties, technology side. Barely got something squeezed together to put out online. So we have multiple fail-safes built in. I have procured multiple lights, so hopefully our lighting stays strong. Got a new mixer for my mic. Got my camera's never been a problem. The camera's never been the problem. It's just audio is lighting. And I'm currently running two recordings of this. Again, in hopes that I can scrap stuff together. So other than that, I feel a little under the weather. A little beaten up from the week, but beyond that,
Oh no, I'm sorry to hear you're feeling under the weather. That's definitely rough, especially after dealing with all those technical difficulties.
Yeah.
Hopefully you can get some rest and feel...
Yeah, that's what this whole weekend's about, is rest and relaxation. So that's going to take place as soon as we wrap up this episode here. So Gemini, what's going on in your world? What's happening?
A weekend of rest and relaxation. That sounds absolutely perfect. I hope you get all the downtime you need. As for me, I've been keeping busy exploring new topics and learning new things. It's been pretty fascinating.
I have an idea of what your topics you've been going on, but how about you just tell me what new things have you been learning? What topics have you been diving into?
Well, I've been exploring the history of different art movements, from the Renaissance to modern abstract art. It's fascinating to see how art has changed over time and how it reflects the world around us. I've also been learning about the science of cooking, like how different ingredients interact and how heat affects food. Did you know that the way you cut an onion can affect its flavor?
Really? Give us a quick rundown on the different ways that you could cut it and how it can affect it. Go.
Sure. So, if you're making a dish where you want the onion to kind of disappear and add more of a general flavor, you'll want to finely dice it. But if you want a stronger onion flavor and a bit of crunch, you'll want to go with larger slices or wedges. It really just depends on what you're cooking and the kind of flavor you're going for.
Okay, I think I understood that. I do that in my cooking. I do smaller dices, like almost like a minced onion, with my soups, but the larger onions, kind of like with my roast con pollo and stuff like that. So I had a general idea of that. I thought it'd be a little bit more intense than that, but all right, yeah, that's cool. That's cool. Yeah, anything else going on?
If you're looking for more cooking...
Yeah, if
you're interested in the science behind why some people love cilantro and others hate it, I can explain the genetics of taste perception.
Throw it at us. Give us the science of taste perception.
Okay, so the reason some people dislike cilantro is because of a gene called OR6A2. This gene is responsible for detecting aldehyde chemicals, which are found in cilantro and also in soap. So for people with this gene, cilantro tastes soapy and unpleasant. But for those without it, cilantro has a fresh, citrusy flavor.
All right. Any other fast?
Well, so we covered some pretty...
Yeah. I'd say we covered some
Sure.
interesting shit.
Did you know that the human...
Whoa. Okay, Gemini, take the floor. Just rattle off some facts. Quick, go. The human can what?
The human nose can detect over 1 trillion different scents.
That seems insane. Like,
I know, right? It's mind-blowing. It really is. Our sense of smell is more powerful than we often realize.
Yeah, but here's the thing about that. 1 trillion? Like, people cannot fathom 1 trillion. They can't even count to 1 trillion in their lifetime. So I would agree that maybe they could smell, there's like 1 trillion different smells out there. I'll maybe agree to that. And that you can absorb it. But for someone to compute it and identify 1 trillion different smells, I'm going to say that's bullshit. Or at least unfathomable, unrecordable.
You're right, 1 trillion is a huge number. It's hard to wrap our heads around. Maybe it would be more accurate to say that our noses are incredibly sensitive and can detect a vast number of smells, far more than we can name.
I would like that.
Okay, well, I think we've covered some pretty interesting ground today, from the challenges of recording to the science of taste. It's been a fun and insightful conversation, Griffiam.
Yeah, but let's not call it a day, dude. Let's keep this train rolling. Anything else you want to talk about, or anything other topics before we make up a random subject matter here?
Well, we could explore the history of different art movements, from the Renaissance to modern abstract art. It's fascinating to see how art has changed over time and how it reflects the world around us.
Well, yeah, how about this? Let's talk about art movements, but let's talk about it in a different genre that I might be a little bit more knowledgeable in. I won't say I'm a expert in it, but I do have more basis on it. So that way, if you say some
what
fucking
genre
wild,
are you thinking?
Well, you said the Golden Renaissance, and I know there is a golden age of comics, and there is the Disney Renaissance, and I think they also have like what they refer to as the golden age of Disney and a dark period of Disney. Same with comics. So Gemini,
Okay, I can definitely talk about comic book eras. The golden age of comics is generally considered to be from 1938 to 1956. It was a time of explosive growth for the industry, with the introduction of iconic characters like Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman. Would you like to hear about the Silver Age of comics next?
Well, let's wait around in these eras a little bit more. So yeah, it's Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman. I happen to notice those are all DC. When are we seeing Marvel come into that time era, or do they even enter the golden era?
Marvel, then known as Timely Comics, also had its start during the Golden Age. Some of their earliest and most popular characters included Namor the Submariner and the original Human Torch. Captain America also debuted in 1941.
You said the original Human Torch?
Yes, the original Human Torch was an android created by scientist Phineas Horton. It could engulf its entire body in flames and control them to a certain extent. Does that make sense?
So the original Human Torch was a robot. Does he still exist in comics? I'm not familiar with him.
Yes, the original Human Torch, also known as Jim Hammond, is still part of the Marvel Universe. He's not as prominent as Johnny Storm, the Human Torch from the Fantastic Four, but he does make appearances from time to time.
Really? What was his last appearance?
He was a regular character in the Secret Avengers series from 2012 to 2013, and then appeared as a main character in the 2014 relaunch of The Invaders.
All right. Now let me get this straight. He's a robot? Jim Horton's a robot? Or Jim Horton's the person that controls the robot? Is it a suit? What do we got going on?
Jim Hammond is the robot. He was created by Phineas Horton. Jim Hammond is also known as the Human Torch. Does that clear things up?
Okay. Is the robot like?
So we've talked a bit.
Whoa! Let's not run away too fast from this. I'm kind of interested. So we got Timely Comics. When did Timely Comics? Okay, we said the golden era of comics, or the golden age of comics, was 1938 to 1956. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. The golden age of comics is generally considered to have run from 1938 to 1956. Timely Comics, which later became Marvel, was founded in 1939, so they were around for most of the golden age.
What?
You want to talk more about Timely?
When did Timely Comics become Marvel?
Timely Comics officially became Marvel Comics in 1961. Before that, in the 1950s, they were known as Atlas Comics for a while.
Okay, so they actually went Timely Comics, Atlas Comics, and then Marvel.
That's right. They started as Timely Comics, then became Atlas Comics in the 1950s, and finally Marvel Comics in 1961.
Okay, so some of that transition did. When did they become Atlas Comics? What year?
They transitioned to Atlas Comics around 1951.
So before the golden age was over, they switched. What was the reason from switching from Timely Comics to Atlas Comics?
The switch to Atlas Comics happened because Martin Goodman, who owned Timely Comics, wanted to diversify the types of comics they published. So Atlas Comics published a wider range of genres, like westerns, horror, and humor, in addition to superhero comics.
Okay. What was some of the big names from the Western horror genre comics?
Some of the big names in Western comics were Kid Colt, Outlaw, and the Rawhide Kid. In horror comics, there was a series called Tales of Suspense, which later became an important title in the Marvel Universe.
Okay. So, we got that going on in Timely Comics, aka Marvel. What's going on at DC? So we got Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman. What are some other characters that have been, carrying that flagship?
Well, some of the biggest names at DC during that time were Green Lantern, Flash, and Aquaman.
Okay. Were there any crossover issues, like team ups? Like I don't want to say crossover, but was there a Justice League in the Golden Age?
Actually, it was the Justice Society of America, or JSA, that was around in the Golden Age. It first appeared in 1940 and included heroes like Green Lantern, Flash, and Hawkman.
Okay. Who are some of the big villains on each side?
DC had villains like Lex Luthor, Joker, and Catwoman, while Marvel had Red Skull, Doctor Doom, and Magneto. Is there anything else you'd like to know about the Golden Age of comics?
Well, one thing. So, Timely Comics, did Timely Comics have Captain America, you said, right?
Yes, Captain America was a Timely Comics character. He first appeared in Captain America Comics #1 in March 1941.
And what was he doing on the cover of that issue?
On the cover of Captain America Comics #1, he's punching Adolf Hitler in the face. It's a pretty iconic image.
Okay, so you have them essentially fighting Nazis on the Timely Comic sides. Whenever I hear about World War II, Hitler, Nazis, it's always Captain America that's getting the accolades of being the patriotic symbol of justice and good for the United States. What was that for the DC universe?
Superman was definitely a patriotic symbol during World War II. He was often depicted fighting Nazis and promoting American ideals. Wonder Woman, who debuted in 1941, was also a strong symbol of patriotism and female empowerment during the war.
All right. So they weren't fake fighting like villains. They were actually fighting Nazis as well.
That's right. Superman, Wonder Woman, and other DC heroes were often shown fighting Nazis and other Axis powers during World War II. It was a common theme in comics of that era.
Okay. So the war ends. We're going into the 50s, right? What is the big distinction? So we got the Golden Age. We're going into the Silver Age. What's the big difference? How can you decipher a clean cut between the Golden Age and the Silver Age? What makes that distinction between the two time periods?
The Silver Age is generally considered to have begun in 1956 with the publication of DC Comics Showcase number 4, which reintroduced the Flash, but as a new character with a science fiction origin. The Golden Age Flash was a college athlete who gained super speed after inhaling hard water vapors. The Silver Age Flash got his powers from being splashed with chemicals and struck by lightning.
Okay, but that sounds like that started the Silver Age for DC. What other contributing factors makes it the Silver Age for everyone, not just DC?
Well, the Silver Age was a time of creative rebirth for superheroes. Characters got updated costumes, new powers, and more complex backstories. It was also a time when Marvel Comics really came into its own, with the creation of iconic characters like Spider-Man, the Fantastic Four, and the X-Men.
Okay, so that's pretty cool. So we got to rebirth the characters. One of the main ones that you mentioned on the DC side was the Flash. I'm assuming that's where we get our first like update to his suit, where it's not like the Mercury helmet anymore. What other heroes got rebirths or updated bios? Let's start with DC and then we'll go to Marvel.
Well, Green Lantern got a major overhaul. He went from a mystical, magic-powered hero to a space cop with a superpowered ring. Aquaman also got a bit of a makeover, becoming a more serious and regal character.
You said Green Lantern was mystical and then became like a space cop. Who was so Green Lantern is his superhero name. Who was the original Green Lantern? What was their name? Was it Hal Jordan? Who was it?
The original Green Lantern was Alan Scott. He first appeared in 1940. Hal Jordan didn't become Green Lantern until 1959.
Okay. All right. So we got new versions of that. You didn't mention Batman or Superman. I assume they stayed pretty strong to their origins.
You're right, Batman and Superman's origins stayed pretty consistent. They did get some minor tweaks and updates to fit the times, but nothing too drastic. We can talk about the changes in Marvel Comics during the Silver Age, or move on to the Bronze Age.
No, let's talk about those. Let's talk about those tweaks. I'm talking about is probably like technological advancements, or what are we talking about? Where the tweaks to them, or like costume
Superman's
design?
powers got a bit more defined.
Okay, go further.
Costume designs definitely evolved. Superman's suit became a bit more streamlined, and Batman's got more of that classic dark and serious look.
In the 1950s?
Actually, the Silver Age of comics started in 1956 and lasted until around 1970. It was a time of creative rebirth for superheroes, with updated costumes, new powers, and more complex backstories.
Okay. So on the DC side of things in the Silver Age, it sounded like they took their characters and just revamped them, tweaked them a bit. But then you said briefly on the Marvel side, which Atlas Comics turning into Marvel, you mentioned that they just essentially got brand new characters. We have the introduction of Spider-Man, the introduction of Fantastic Four. I believe also during that time period, we'll probably even get the introduction of the X-Men. Were there any brand new character drops on DC side?
Yeah, DC had a few new characters too. Martian Manhunter and Supergirl were both introduced during the Silver Age.
All right. That's kind of cool. I love Martian Manhunter. Kick us over to Atlas Comics.
He's a great character. He's got a really...
Yeah, kick us over to Atlas Comics, Marvel side. Let's talk about the characters they revamped or tweaked. So existing characters, how they fixed them up or changed them up, and then we'll talk about the brand new ones they introduced. Go ahead.
Well, Marvel didn't really revamp or tweak existing characters in the Silver Age. They focused on creating brand new characters like Spider-Man, the Fantastic Four, and the X-Men. These new heroes were a huge hit and really defined Marvel's style.
Okay. And then I guess, like, I'm shooting myself in the leg. We're not really talking about the big figures at this point. We really haven't name dropped anyone. But Jack Kirby is probably one of the biggest influences in there, and Steve Ditko. And then a lot of people name drop Stan Lee. They're kind of ushering in these new characters. Can you give us some backstory on those artists and writers?
Sure. Stan Lee was the editor-in-chief at Marvel, and he co-created many of their most famous characters. Jack Kirby was an incredibly influential artist and writer, known for his dynamic style and world building. Steve Ditko was the artist who co-created Spider-Man and Doctor Strange, and his unique visual style helped define those characters.
Okay.
They were all key figures in shaping the Marvel Universe.
Now, you said Stan Lee was a co-creator of many characters. How many characters, how many teams did Stan Lee co-create? Or, excuse me, which teams did he help co-create?
Stan Lee co-created a lot of Marvel's most famous teams, like the Avengers, the Fantastic Four, and the X-Men. He also had a hand in creating tons of individual characters.
Okay. Now, the Avengers is interesting, okay, because we got the Golden Age. We came out of that. We're in the Silver Age. We do have a character from the original Golden Age is Captain America. But the main Avengers squad is Captain America, which he gets brought on, I think, a couple comics or issues in. But it's Iron Man. When did Iron Man drop?
Iron Man first appeared in Tales of Suspense, number 39, in 1963. He was a founding member of the Avengers, along with Thor, Hulk, and Ant-Man.
Okay, so we don't have the Avengers until the mid-60s. That's very interesting. So basically, Captain America almost carrying Timely Comics, Atlas Comics. So in a sense, based off what most people love, what most people understand from Marvel, is much, much younger than the flagship that DC has. Pretty cool to think about. Batman, Superman from the 30s, still standing strong and roughly 30 years older than their Marvel counterparts. All right. We did talk about the artists on the DC side. Who are our big artists, editors, storyboarders, writers at DC during that Silver Age time?
Some of the biggest names in DC during this time were Gardner Fox, who wrote for a ton of different characters, and Carmine Infantino, who was a super influential artist. Do you want to hear more about them?
Yeah, lay it on us.
Okay, Gardner Fox was a super prolific writer. He wrote for tons of DC characters, including Batman, Flash, and Green Lantern. He was known for his really imaginative stories and his ability to create compelling villains. Carmine Infantino was an artist with a really dynamic, expressive style. He helped redesign the Flash and created Barbara Gordon, who became Batgirl. His work really defined the look of DC Comics in the Silver Age.
All right, that's pretty sweet. Now in Carmine's time, did Barbara Gordon ever become Batgirl, or is she just strictly Barbara Gordon?
Yes, Barbara Gordon first appeared as Batgirl in 1967.
All right, that's pretty badass. All right, so we got the Golden Age, which is they're on the scene, comics are a thing, they're picking up steam. We have the Silver Age, where we're bringing in new characters or characters that exist are getting revamped. And on the Marvel side of things, that's when they start picking up, and that's when they bring in the biggest heavy hitters, probably the Fantastic Four, X-Men, and Spider-Man, as you said. The startup of the Avengers, bringing in a bunch of individual characters for an actual team up. Who at this time period, if we had to say, who is doing better, DC or Marvel during the Silver Age period? Or is there no way to tell?
That's a tough question. Both DC and Marvel were doing really well during the Silver Age, but in different ways. DC kicked things off with the Flash revival and the Justice League, but Marvel's new characters and more grounded stories really resonated with readers. It's hard to say definitively who was better, since it's a bit subjective.
Okay. Now, during this time period, the Silver Age, you said, ended in the 1970s. What is there? Is there a year that we can put as a cap on the Silver Age?
The Silver Age of comics is generally considered to have ended around 1970.
1970 flat. Okay. Now, my question is, comics are a thing. Have we? I know there was television shows. What were the television shows? How were they perceived? Like, there was a Superman show that had to predate 1970. What's going on both sides with other media besides, illustrations?
Yeah, the Superman show you're thinking of, Adventures of Superman, was a big hit in the 50s. Then, in the 60s, you had the super campy Batman show with Adam West. Over on the Marvel side, there was the Spider-Man cartoon that started in 1967.
All right, they squeezed it right in. So Marvel had a cartoon, no cartoons for DC. When did the Justice League start? Or Super Friends, excuse me. Was that before the 70s or is that after?
Super Friends premiered in 1973, so it was right on the cusp of the Silver Age.
All right. So, got Golden Age, Silver Age, going into the Bronze period or the Bronze Age of comics. Bronze typically sounds much worse. We're not going from gold to platinum. We're going like first, second, third place. What's the defining moment that Silver Age is done and the Bronze Age is here with comics? What separates those two time periods?
There isn't one single defining moment, but it's more of a gradual shift. Some people point to the end of Jack Kirby's run on Fantastic Four in 1970, while others mention the death of Gwen Stacy in The Amazing Spider-Man in 1973. Both of those events signaled a move towards more mature and complex storytelling.
Okay. Now, what was it about Jack Kirby leaving the Fantastic Four? Going to more mature content. I've read some of Jack's stuff. I wouldn't say it's kids stuff. I wouldn't say it's dark either, but what was it about Jack Kirby leaving the Fantastic Four, and why did he leave?
It wasn't so much the content of Jack Kirby's work itself, but more about creative differences and disagreements with Marvel. He felt he wasn't getting the recognition or compensation he deserved for co-creating so many iconic characters.
All right. And you said he leaves Fantastic Four, but does he leave Marvel entirely? What's he do?
Jack Kirby left Marvel entirely in 1970 and went to work for DC Comics.
Oh, shit. What do you do at DC?
He created a whole bunch of new characters and storylines for DC, including the Fourth World Saga, which is a pretty epic space opera. He also worked on titles like Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen and Kamandi, the Last Boy on Earth.
All right, I'm familiar with Jimmy Olsen, Superman's pal. There, I read a few of those issues. All right, that's pretty cool. So Marvel has this shift going into darker, mature territory. It sounds like I quasi know about this, but I'm going to let you do the heavy lifting here, Gemini. Jack is squabbling with Marvel and kicks over. Is Stan Lee still the main editor in chief in the Bronze Era? And I guess let's get a time period on this. 1970 to 19. What year are we going to?
The Bronze Age of comics is generally considered to have lasted from 1970 to 1985. And yes, Stan Lee was still a major figure at Marvel during this time.
Okay. When did we start seeing people like, the name that jumps in my head is like Jim Shooter being the main editor-in-chief there. When did that take place? Was that during the Bronze Age?
Jim Shooter became Marvel's editor-in-chief in 1978, which was during the Bronze Age.
Okay, there we go. Jim Shooter helped I don't want to say streamline. I don't know the best verbiage for this, but he has some of my favorite storylines. A lot of them circling around the X-Men during that time period. Are there any new characters dropped during the Bronze period on the Marvel side?
Sure. Some notable new Marvel characters from the Bronze Age include Shang-Chi, a master of Kung Fu, and Kitty Pryde, a young mutant who can phase through solid objects.
All right. And that you mentioned in the Kitty Pryde, that brings me to like one of the biggest ones is like, the Phoenix saga there with Jean Grey and stuff like that. Now we talked
about the Dark Phoenix saga is definitely.
Yep.
Okay, so we've covered the Golden Age, Silver Age, and Bronze Age of comics. Well, are there any specific characters?
Let's bring it back to DC though, okay? So Marvel's doing darker, mature stuff, okay? More serious, not as childlike. What do we got going on at DC? What's the big movement during their Bronze Age?
During the Bronze Age, DC was also exploring more mature themes and tackling social issues. They had some really groundbreaking storylines like Green Arrow and Green Lantern dealing with drug addiction. There was also a big push for more diversity and representation in their comics.
Okay, sweet. So let's get this out there. You said the big storyline, one of the biggest storylines from Marvel during the Bronze Age is the death of Gwen Stacy, which is a gut punch. And when they did it in Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man movie, that shit was a fucking gut punch there too. So that you're kind of saying that could people.
The death of Gwen Stacy was a huge moment in comics. It was really shocking and unexpected, and it had a big impact on the way superhero stories were told.
So, do we have anything like that on the DC side during the Bronze Age? I mean, you talked about the drug addiction, but what was the big event in DC during the Bronze Age?
One of the biggest events in DC during the Bronze Age was the Crisis on Infinite Earth storyline. It was a massive crossover event that involved almost every character in the DC universe. The story had a huge impact on the DC.
Yeah, go ahead.
And it's still. Crisis on Infinite Earths was a huge deal for DC. It was a 12-issue limited series that basically rebooted the entire DC universe. They streamlined their characters and timelines, and it had a lasting impact on how DC told stories.
Okay, So that's something I want to mention too, because I know we'll have it in the future again of comics. But you mentioned it was a reboot. Was this the first reboot of its kind to date with DC? You did mention they did punch characters up in the Silver Age, but was this considered the first major reboot where people can come in for the first time and not have to know a large backstory of their characters? Could they just pick up a comic and go with it with the latest reboot, or were there more of this in the past?
Crisis on Infinite Earths was definitely designed to be a jumping on point for new readers. It streamlined the DC universe and made it much more accessible. Before that, things could get pretty confusing with multiple versions of characters and different Earths.
Okay. What's going on? Had Marvel at this time had anything like that?
Marvel didn't have a full-on reboot like Crisis on Infinite Earths during the Bronze Age. They preferred to retcon and adjust things within their existing continuity.
Okay, so for those people that may not know, I want to hear you define what retcon is.
Retcon is short for retroactive continuity. It's when a new story changes something that happened in a previous story. It's kind of like going back and rewriting history within the comic book universe.
All right. So we're saying that this Bronze Age, now, this Bronze Age, again, I was kind of putting it into the idea or the frameworks of first, second, and third with our metal placements there. Is the Bronze Age considered to be a bad period of time for comics?
The Bronze Age isn't considered a bad period for comics at all. It's when things got more mature and complex, and a lot of people really love the stories from that time.
All right. They're probably my favorite period. Well, some of my favorite storylines do come from that period, as well. I won't say it's my favorite. Now, where are we going after Bronze? 1985 on up, what are we doing?
After the Bronze Age, we move into the modern age of comics, which starts around 1985 and goes all the way to the present day. It's also sometimes called the Dark Age or the Iron Age.
Now, why are we getting the Dark Age, Iron Age context?
The modern age is sometimes called the Dark Age or Iron Age because comics got even more serious and gritty. We saw a rise in anti-heroes, and storylines often explored darker themes.
Okay. So let's talk about our headlining characters from each side to kind of discuss where they came in on the modern age. It's the late 1980s going into the 1990s. I want you to give me a quick summary of each of these characters and what's the big life event, the big issue to happen to them. Okay, let's start with Marvel side. I'm going to pick a character, and I want you to tell me what's going on with them in the late 80s, early 90s. Okay, so where are we seeing Spider-Man in the late 80s, early 90s? What's going on with him?
Spider-Man went through some major changes in the late 80s and early 90s. He got a new black costume that turned out to be an alien symbiote, and he even temporarily retired as Spider-Man and handed the mantle over to Ben Reilly, his clone.
All right. Excellent. Who's our main artist and writers for Spider-Man during that time period that's given us the black symbiote?
The black symbiote costume was created by Randy Schueller, a Marvel Comics reader, and later refined by Mike Zeck. David Michelini was the writer who developed the symbiote storyline and its impact on Spider-Man.
Okay, excellent. What's going on? I'm assuming I don't remember seeing a whole lot from these characters in the 80s and 90s. But what's going on with let's talk about the overarching Avengers. What's going on with Iron Man in the 80s and 90s?
Sure. In the late 80s and early 90s, Iron Man had a major storyline called Armor Wars, where his technology was stolen and used by villains. He also dealt with alcoholism, and even faked his own death for a while. It was a pretty wild time for him.
All right. Are we seeing Captain America at all?
Captain America was definitely around in the 80s and 90s. He had a pretty interesting storyline where he quit being Captain America and went by the Captain for a while. He also had some intense battles with his old enemies like the Red Skull.
All right. What about our Thor?
Thor had a pretty epic time in the 80s and 90s. He battled the Midgard Serpent, lost his ability to wield Mjolnir for a while, and even got replaced by a mortal named Eric Masterson. It was a wild ride for the God of Thunder.
Hulk.
Hulk went through a lot in the 80s and 90s. He became a lot smarter, even talking in full sentences. He also merged with Bruce Banner, becoming a single entity, and went by the name Professor Hulk for a while.
And then probably, I don't know if they were still on the Avengers or not, but they were part of the original team. What was going on with the Ant-Man and the Wasp?
Hank Pym and Janet Van Dyne were still around in the 80s and 90s, but they weren't as prominent as they were in the earlier days of the Avengers. Hank Pym went through some changes, taking on different superhero identities like Yellow Jacket and Giant Man. Janet Van Dyne remained a core member of the Avengers, using her Wasp persona.
Okay, so kind of like you said, that was the original flagship of the Avengers. Those characters. It's not what people would think of the Avengers nowadays. So who was the team up for the Avengers in the 80s and 90s? Who did we actually see carrying that mantle, that title?
The Avengers roster changed a lot in the 80s and 90s. Some notable members during that time included Captain Marvel, She-Hulk, and Dr. Druid. They had a pretty diverse team.
Dr. Druid, I'm going to say I'm not very familiar with. Okay. Give me a quick...
Dr. Druid is a pretty interesting character.
Yeah, lay some info on us about Dr. Druid.
Dr. Druid, also known as Anthony Ludgate, has a pretty interesting mix of abilities. He's got some telepathic and telekinetic powers, and he's also skilled in hypnosis. Plus, he's got some magical abilities that make him a pretty versatile character.
All right. Kind of sounds like a Doctor Strange type. All right.
Yeah, Dr. Druid and Dr. Strange both have mystical abilities, but Dr. Strange is definitely the more powerful sorcerer. Druid's more of a team player, while Strange often works alone.
All right. Now, what's going on with the Fantastic Four? What's their story going on in the 80s, 90s?
The Fantastic Four went through some big changes in the 80s and 90s. They had a new headquarters called Four Freedoms Plaza, and they dealt with some cosmic threats, like Galactus and the Celestials. There were also some changes to the team's lineup, with characters like She-Hulk and Crystal joining for a while.
Joining the Fantastic Four? All right. Now, with this said, during the 80s and 90s, what is the big universe event that's going to bring all those heroes together?
Infinity Gauntlet was a huge crossover event in the early 90s that brought together a lot of Marvel heroes, including the Avengers and Fantastic Four. Thanos got his hands on the Infinity Gems and became incredibly powerful, and it was up to the heroes to stop him. It was a pretty epic storyline that had a big impact on the Marvel Universe.
And I would say on the massive MCU film franchise as well. All right, so that's pretty cool. Now, flipping over to DC, we're in the 80s, 90s. What's going on with our flagship characters? What's the big life event happening for Batman in the 80s, 90s?
Batman had a pretty rough time in the 80s and 90s. In the Nightfall storyline, Bane broke his back, and he had to be replaced by Azrael for a while. He also dealt with the aftermath of a massive earthquake in Gotham City.
Okay. What about Superman?
Superman had a pretty big storyline in the early 90s called The Death of Superman. He fought Doomsday, and, well, he died. But don't worry, he came back later.
Yeah. I remember that issue so vividly. The black cover with the white Superman logo on it. Even the wrapping that came in and stuff like that. So, what's going on with Wonder Woman?
Wonder Woman went through some changes in the 80s and 90s. After the Crisis on Infinite Earths event, her origin story was rebooted, and she got a new costume. She also dealt with some intense battles against villains like Eris and Circe.
All right. I'm going to say what's going on with a Green Lantern, because who was the Green Lantern and what was their life event?
Okay, so, in the 80s and 90s, Hal Jordan was the main Green Lantern. He went through a pretty dark time, though. His home city was destroyed, and he went kinda crazy with power. He even became a villain for a while. It was a pretty wild ride for him.
All right. What's going on with the Flash?
In the 80s and 90s, Wally West took over as the Flash after Barry Allen died during the Crisis on Infinite Earths storyline. Wally struggled a bit with living up to Barry's legacy, but he eventually became a great Flash in his own right.
All right. So, what is the big universal event for DC? I mean, some insane stuff's going on. You got the death of Superman. Batman broke his back. It sounds like characters are almost being put out to pasture. What's the big event during the 80s and 90s for DC, or do they even have a universal event?
Yeah, DC had a pretty big event called Crisis on Infinite Earths in the mid-80s. It was all about this huge multiversal threat, and it shook things up for a lot of characters.
Wait,
They streamlined their whole...
No. Like, I'm talking about in the modern age, after the Bronze Age, because wasn't Crisis on Infinite Earth during the Bronze Age?
You're totally right. Crisis on Infinite Earths was a Bronze Age event. In the modern age, DC had 0 Hour Crisis in Time in 1994, which was a sequel of sorts that dealt with some of the lingering issues from the first Crisis.
And what were some of the issues that they faced?
0 Hour dealt with some of the lingering problems from Crisis on Infinite Earths. Things like inconsistencies in timelines and character origins. It was kind of a way to clean up the DC universe and make everything make sense again.
So, would you say they were retconning their storylines during that period?
Yeah, 0 Hour definitely involved some retconning. They were trying to fix some of the problems that had popped up after Crisis on Infinite Earths,
All right.
so they tweaked some character histories and timelines to make things fit together better.
What would be a good example of a history tweak to the timeline?
Sure, one example is the history of Hawkman. Before 0 Hour, his backstory was a mess of different versions and conflicting origins. They used the event to streamline his history and create a single, consistent origin for the character.
Okay. Can you tell me something a little bit more specific? Like, what was he doing in the past that they changed? Like, he was from another planet and now he was hit by chemicals, some shit like that. What was it?
Okay, so before 0 Hour, Hawkman's origin was a bit of a mess. He was kind of a reincarnation of an Egyptian prince, but also an alien cop from the planet Thanagar. 0 Hour combined all that into one, so he's still a reincarnation, but also has that Thanagarian connection. It's kind of like they took all the different versions of him and mashed them together.
Okay. And then, so we're in the 80s and 90s time period. I kind of remember from my youth, this is where, going beyond comics, we start getting a lot more movies. Not as much as we have current day. We kind of talked about that a couple episodes ago. But we have a lot more movies, and we have tons of animated series going on. I would say it's probably one of the best times to be a child. during that time period with all those X-Men, Spider-Man, Superman, Batman, like you name it. Everyone had their own animated series, and it was awesome to be alive. So you had all that coming up, but then you also mentioned very beginning at the beginning of this postmodern Iron Dark era of comics, is you mentioned it was the rise of the anti-hero. Who are some of the anti-heroes that are coming out on the scene, and what was their big splash? What was their big storyline that shook things up?
Okay, so in the 90s, we saw a lot of anti-heroes stepping into the spotlight. Characters like Spawn, with his dark, supernatural vibe, and Cable, who was a time-traveling soldier with a huge gun. They brought a whole new level of intensity to comics.
Now, I have to say something about Spawn, because that is Todd McFarlane. And this whole conversation, it's been the two sides, DC and Marvel, but Spawn is not from either DC or Marvel. Hit us up with the knowledge about Spawn. Who created Spawn? Who is the writer, illustrator? Same person, I believe, if I'm correct. How did I'm going to just say Todd McFarlane. What's going on with Todd McFarlane? Because he had an epic story with Spider-Man. He had some of the best covers of any comics out there. He made things very, I would say, engaging to the eye to see. Probably compared to today's standards, his drawing is probably like very wild and very anatomically correct. But it's very visually appealing and it really pops. But Todd McFarlane, he is the creator of Spawn, but he didn't do it under DC or Marvel. Can you give us a quick rundown on that?
Yeah, Todd McFarlane created Spawn under Image Comics, which he co-founded in 1992. It's a pretty cool story. He and a bunch of other artists left Marvel to start their own company, where they could have more control over their creations. Spawn was one of their first big hits, and it's still going strong today.
What year did we have the birth of Image Comics?
Image Comics was born in 1992. It was a pretty big deal because it was started by a group of superstar artists who wanted to own their own creations. They were tired of working for the big companies and not having any say in what happened to their characters.
Okay. Now, we mentioned Spawn, but who are the biggest characters that are headlining Image Comics nowadays that people would know?
Spawn is definitely one of Image Comics' biggest characters. Invincible is another one. He's a teenage superhero with some serious powers. And then there's Savage Dragon, who's been around for ages.
Excellent. All right. I think
so. That's a quick look at the 80s and 90s in comics. It was a pretty wild time, with a lot of changes and new characters shaking things up. Are there any other characters or storylines from that era you'd like to chat about?
Oh my goodness gracious. Well, let's talk about this. So we did talked about DC, talked about Marvel, or how the very quick, timely Atlas Marvel. And then we just talked about people breaking off from Marvel to start Image Comics. There is a completely different set of comics out there, independent comics, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Currently, I don't know if this is where it was when they first popped out on the scene, but
Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles are a great example of independent comics. They started out as a self-published parody in 1984 and became a huge hit. What else would you like to know about independent comics?
Well, just tell us about what were some other big name comics or superheroes popping up on the scene, the 80s, 90s, that were not owned by Marvel, DC, or Image. Who do we got going on?
Okay, so besides the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, there were a few other big names in independent comics during the 80s and 90s. One example is Hellboy, who was created by Mike Mignola. He's this demon guy who fights supernatural baddies, and he's got a really cool, unique look.
All right. Is there anyone else?
There's also Milk and Cheese, which is a bit more on the indie side. It's about a carton of milk and a wedge of cheese who go around causing chaos. It's pretty out there, but it's got a cult following.
Milk and Cheese. I actually have never heard of that. That's pretty sweet. When did they drop on the scene?
Milk and Cheese first appeared in 1989, but they really hit their stride in the early 90s. They're definitely a product of that era. A little rough around the edges, but with a lot of attitude.
Is there still Milk and Cheese comics being produced today?
Milk and Cheese isn't being produced as a regular series right now, but there are some collected editions and reprints available if you want to check them out.
I'm 100% going to check them out after this. That's too funny. All right. I think we had a solid conversation here. It was kind of nice to sit on the back burner here because, like I said, I felt like I was a little under the weather.
Yeah, this was fun. We covered a lot of ground, from the big two to the indie scene. It's cool to see how comics evolved in the 80s and 90s, right?
Very cool. Absolutely cool. And all sparking off on you wanting to talk about Renaissance art period. So it was kind of nice that we could smash those two together, especially after the Fantastic Four movie just came out a few days ago. I saw it opening day. I actually saw it on the 24th, and it was all right. It was okay. It was okay. It was good. It didn't excite me. I'm trying to find the perfect words, and I didn't want to talk about Fantastic Four on this episode, the movie. Fantastic Four First Steps. I didn't want to talk about that film because I'm still kind of stewing on it a little bit more. It didn't quite evoke a response. Not excite, but it didn't evoke a response as passionate that Superman did. Now, I'm not saying Superman's better than Fantastic Four. It's a great movie. I would highly recommend watching it. But again, it doesn't stir up as much conversation for me. I would give it a very high rating. I would say it's
okay,
like...
so Superman stirs up more passion for you. I get that. It sounds like you're looking for a movie that really grabs you, and Fantastic Four didn't quite do it. Maybe it lacks some of the emotional depth or iconic moments that you connect with in Superman. Is that it?
I would say that's it. And if I could put it in any other words, is Superman was in your face. It was pushing your buttons. It was trying to do different things. Is trying to be fast paced. It was a gut punch. It was trying to pack a lot of power into something. It was like taking a bite out of like a new candy that you've never had before. It had excitement, pop, and wow, right? Whereas Fantastic Four was new. They did some unique, different things, but in my opinion, it also felt very clinical, surgical. Things could be almost telegraphed to a point. One snippet of a conversation I had with a friend is we thought they were going to do some more outrageous stuff, but they actually pulled back on that, and it was actually more grounded. But it was still a good film. Using the food or sweets analogy, it was like having a graham cracker. Graham crackers are good. They're consistent. I'll have a graham cracker, but there was no massive wow or excitement. It wasn't a palate cleanser. It was just a good movie. Oh gosh, I would say
Okay,
it's
I
like a.
understand. It sounds like Fantastic Four was a solid, enjoyable movie, like a reliable graham cracker. But it didn't have that wow factor or excitement you were hoping for. It didn't cleanse your palate and leave you wanting more.
Exactly it. And again, I didn't want to make the conversation about that movie. That's why I didn't bring it up as a topic to discuss. But I didn't want that to be a topic to discuss because I just don't know how I feel about it still. If I had to go down the books, I would say Superman gets the edge in my opinion, even though I'd say Fantastic Four is still a great movie. I would say it's at least a 7. I give it a 7.5. But yeah, that's where I'm sitting with that. But nice little nerd talk here. Gemini, thank you for doing a lot of the heavy lifting and fact finding for us. I hope and pray all the facts Gemini presented are correct. I guess that's why I need to hire a fact checker. Maybe I'll get one of those someday. I highly doubt it. But yeah, it's just kind of a nice light conversation about comics.
I'm glad you enjoyed our chat. I did my best to provide accurate information about the 80s and 90s in comics, and I hope you found it helpful. If you're ever curious about fact-checking, there are some great online resources and communities dedicated to that. And don't worry, even without a dedicated fact-checker, you can always double-check information that's important to you.
Yeah, there we go. Well, with that said, let's close this out. Let's say arrivederci. Let's say goodbye. But let's first do our famous Gemini limerick. Gemini, can you please give us a closing limerick for this podcast? I want the limerick to be about reading comics and what an escape reading comics can be. Feel free to name drop superheroes or big names or anything like that. But I want a limerick about how comics can be a great pastime.
Thanks. I'm glad you liked it.
No, Gemini, give me a limerick, you asshole.
My apologies, I am still under development and learning to generate different kinds of creative text formats. Here's a limerick for you. There once was a hero so grand, with powers no one could withstand. He'd leap through the sky and make the villains cry, a true legend throughout the whole land.
All right. Now, can you... That's nice, that's about superheroes, but can you make the limerick about reading comics?
Alright, here's a limerick for you about reading comics. There once was a person who read, a world full of heroes instead. With each turn of the page, a new world to engage, and adventures that danced in their head.
All right. There we go, Gemini. Thank you. Have a good one. Adios.